Mr. Terry Tucker. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm excited to talk to you.
Me too, Shane. Thanks for having me. I think it's going to be fun today.
Yeah, and just as we were talking about before we started recording, you have a very diverse and interesting background. I mean, just from what I've read about you, you were a D1 basketball player. You've worked in the corporate world in marketing and customer service. You spent some time in law enforcement. You were a police officer, and then you worked in some like undercover stuff. You did some SWAT hostage negotiation things. And then you went into like the private security sector, school security, and then coaching you did as well. And then, then you sort of got hit with this big life challenge of being diagnosed with this really brutal and rare cancer that you've been dealing with for a number of years. And sort of all that's led to a culmination of you writing this book, right? And it's about, really maximizing one's abilities and being able to sustain excellence. I mean, the book's called Sustainable Excellence, and of course, I'll put all the links to that in the description so people know where to find it. But it's an amazing story of transformation, of being able to go from just different worlds entirely and reinvent yourself at every point and learn the skills and, develop and meet all the challenges that come with it, and, through the pain and the suffering on the career side of things. And then you've sort of managed to integrate that into having also gone through this really rough cancer treatment phase of your life, which I believe you're still to some degree doing right now, and bringing that all together to really inspire people to live their best lives and to manage the difficulties and the traumas and the things that they've been through and how to just make the most of it, right? And so having given you that really extended intro, I'll sort of, maybe I'll just preface this episode with just saying, like, there is a lot that we can discuss, and some of the things that we're going to talk about today is going to be, one is I'm very interested in your work as a police officer and, what that was like. And then we're also going to talk about, your difficulties with cancer and, how that's changed your view and your understanding of life and your appreciation for life itself, because, it really puts you at death's door. And that's something that's, also just a hell of a story. So I guess we'll start off with this question. So maybe could you just give a little bit of context of, like, how did you end up in the police force to begin with, and where was it?
So I have to kind of go back to when I was a kid. My grandfather was a Chicago police officer. Chicago's a fairly large city here in the United States, probably the third largest city. And he was a policeman from 1924 to 1954. So he was in Chicago during the height of Prohibition, when alcohol was outlawed in the United States. Also during the Great Depression in the 30s. And during the time when Chicago had a lot of gangsters, so to speak, that were going around shooting up the city, trying to claim territory and stuff like that. And I don't really remember my grandfather. He died when I was like 7 years old. But he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. Wasn't a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle, but he was taking a murder suspect back to the lockup. And my dad always remembered the stories that my grandmother told about the knock on the door of, "Mrs. Tucker, please grab your son. Your husband's been shot, and come with us." So when I said, I'd really kind of like to go into law enforcement, my dad was, "Oh, nope, you're going to college. You're going to major in business. You're going to get out of college, get a job, get married, have 2.4 kids, live in the suburbs, and live happily ever after." That's what my dad wanted me to do. That's not what I wanted to do. So the problem I had is, my dad did that out of love. He didn't do it out of spite or anything like that. He wanted me to have a better life. But when I graduated from college, he had cancer. He was dying of cancer. And so if you look at my resume, my first two jobs, the The first one was in the marketing department at the corporate headquarters of Wendy's, the hamburger chain. And the second job was in hospital administration. And I took those jobs to appease my dad, to be perfectly honest with you. I didn't want to hurt him any more than he already was with cancer. So I took those jobs. And I always kind of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited till my dad died, and then I followed my dreams. So,
Right.
you know, so I was a 37-year-old rookie policeman in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's kind of how it all started.
And so you knew it, like, even before you were doing these corporate gigs, like, you had some inclination that you wanted to be a police officer.
I did. I mean, it was just something in my heart, you know, that I knew that was the direction I wanted to go. And, you know, I always tell, especially young people, you know, if there's something that's burning inside you, your heart, your soul, whatever you want to call it, and that you want to do, and it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things that you're going to regret are not going to be the things you did. They're going to be the things you didn't do. And by that time, it's going to be too late to go back and do them.
Yeah. And I mean, it takes, you know, a real amount of courage, I suppose, to, you know, be 37 and be like, it's time for a serious career change, you know, starting again, basically. Because, you know, I mean, sure, your experience of everything sort of adds to who you are as a person, and that helps you in whatever you're doing. But in terms of like technical skills, like you basically started from zero again, and you were like, I'm prepared to be a rookie now. I'm prepared to, you know, just put my ego aside and not, you know, worry about that kind of stuff and just follow my dreams. And so, you know, kudos to you for doing that. And so how did that go for you? Was it what you had hoped it would be? I mean, what were your first, you know, few years like?
Yeah, I loved it. And I, you know, you talk about me making that career change. I think back to how it really all started. My wife and I were living in California in Santa Barbara, and we got a circular in the mail from Santa Barbara City College. And I never looked through the circular. And one day I'm looking through it and I'm like, oh, there's a course there that if you pass it, you can apply to any law enforcement agency in the state and be a reserve police officer. So you can imagine one night at dinner, you know, it's just my wife and I at this point in time. And, you know, she'd married me. I was a suit and tie, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, you know, hospital administrator. Hey, hon, I'd like to take this course and then do this. And she was extremely supportive. And,
Wow.
you know, I would work all week at my customer service manager job. And then Friday night I would come home, get dressed in my uniform, go to roll call, work all night with no sleep, and come home. And my wife used to say, you would come home exhausted, but with the biggest grin on your face. Like, this is what you were meant to do. And so when our daughter was born and we moved to Cincinnati, you know, I was like, well, I'd like to do this full time now. And so, you know, I went through the police academy, and my first 4 years on the job were running a beat. You know, I was in a marked car in a uniform, was in an area that was not very good. A lot of violence, a lot of drugs, a lot of guns, things like that. Cincinnati ran usually a single person car, but because our beat was so dangerous, it was myself and my partner, who was also from my academy class, also a little bit older. You know, yes, being older was, you know, I took a whole lot more Tylenol in the police academy than probably everybody else did. But having that life experience was much easier to do our job, because we were able to talk to all kinds of different people and not just be, you know, some kid who, I don't really know what to say to you. I know what to say to you. I can't say I've been down this road, but I have some life experience that I can bring to this. And my partner also had a master's degree in counseling, so she was great in terms of, you know, having as a partner.
Right. Yeah. And that makes sense, right? I mean, you do, like, as you mature in life, and you meet more people and you learn about the ways of the world and how everyone or many people are very different from different places, and, you know, talking to them, it's certainly a skill that, you know, being young, you just don't have yet at that point. And then as you get older, I mean, like, that's great experience. And yeah, I mean, I could imagine, like, if I was going to go into the police force, it'd be like, older would be better for me. as well, just being from an experience perspective. I mean, like, yeah, sure, you might, have some challenges on the fitness and physical level of it, but 37's not old. I mean, you're not like, walking with a walker or anything. You've still got, I don't know, 15 or whatever years of like prime physical capacity to still, or more even. I don't know. These days, you see people in their 60s and 70s and they're ripped and they amazing things that the human body can do. But anyway, that's tangential to the point. So then, okay, so you spent 4 years like as did you call it a beat cop? Like just patrol?
Beats are just, the areas where you patrol. It's called a beat. So, yeah.
And so what was that like? Like, because for me, I mean, I guess from a I don't have any experience with, I know a few police officers, but not well enough to sort of know it at a deeper level. Is there sort of day-to-day stuff, like, what's it like? I mean, is it exciting? Is it like draining? Is it was it what you hoped it would be?
Yes.
Yes to all.
Police work a lot of times has been described as 95% boredom and 5% sheer terror. And in a lot of ways, it is. I worked nights my entire police career. So when I first started, I worked 11 o'clock at night till 7 o'clock in the morning. And we would go out and we would answer calls. People would call in, we'd get radio runs and go answer those. But then we would also do self-initiated things like, do vehicle stops and things like that. Use the law, for example, and sometimes, police get criticized for this, but there was a law in Cincinnati that said you had to have a license plate light on your car. If you didn't, that was probable cause for us to pull you over. And I can't tell you the amount of wanted people, the amount of drugs, the amount of guns that we got out of traffic stops, right, just by being proactive in that regard. And I have a grown daughter now, but when she was in high school and college, I used to tell her, it's like, nothing good happens after midnight. I mean, the people that are out, really, after midnight, in Cincinnati, 2 o'clock is when the bars closed. And so you figure 2 o'clock, by the time the drunk people got home, then you'd start getting, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, the domestic violence runs and things like that, or the fight runs and stuff like that. So you could almost sort of plan your night on, well, it's going to be slow from this time so we can do our own stuff. But at this time, we're going to have to do other kind of stuff. And if you're good as a beat officer, knowing the people on your beat, law enforcement's no different than business. You sort of have that 80-20 rule in business where 80% of your business comes from 20% of your customers. Same thing in law enforcement. Right. 80% of the crime comes from 20% of the knuckleheads.
And you know them.
And you know who those people are. And you know where they live. And you know where their mother lives. And you know where their baby's mama lives. And so when you get an investigator that says, hey, we're looking for a guy that looks like this, do you know who this might be? Oh yeah, that's Shorty, or that, whatever it is. I can tell you where Shorty lives and stuff. So if you were good at what you did, you gained intelligence. You figured stuff out. I'll give you a quick story. Sure. We had a lot of dope on our beat, a lot of drugs, and the drug dealers used to have spotters, and they would walk around. And when police would come into the area, they would whistle. Now, you can't do anything about that because you can't prove they're doing anything illegal.
Sure.
So the dope boys decided one day, it's like, you know what, if we put our spotters on bicycles and kind of move them further out, we can have even more time to hide our drugs before the police got there. Well, that was a huge mistake because there are all kinds of laws pertaining to bicycles. So we figured this out, and we went to the city prosecutor, because even there, if there is a law, doesn't necessarily mean if you write a ticket that the prosecutor is going to go ahead and not dismiss that and go ahead and try it. So we were like, what do you think? This is the problem we're having. This is how we want to handle it. Sure. So we started just grabbing all these bicycles. In Cincinnati, you couldn't ride on the sidewalk. You had to have a light. You had to have a reflective light on the back. And we would stop all these guys from, and here's your $125 ticket for this. Here's your $125 ticket for that. Here's your $125 ticket for that. And eventually, these guys wouldn't go to court and they wouldn't pay their fines. So then we take them to jail and we'd impound their bicycles. And so, there's always a way to kind of skin the cat if you think about it and you want to be involved in it.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess from that perspective, like, I really appreciate the like comparison to, where you're just doing business, where you're kind of like, I mean, I don't want this to sound disrespectful, but it's some sort of a game, right? Where you're on one side or you're on the other side, and you're trying to one up each other all the time, right? So whether it's you as the law enforcement trying to see how you can figure out the best way, to get the bad guys, or if you're on the drug dealer side of things, you're always trying to stay one step ahead and trying to see where you can sneak in this or that, or how you can avoid it. And I mean, there's different consequences for different sides, but it's a remarkable like dynamic that goes on, and it requires a huge amount of intelligence on both sides, right? Just to be able to see things and to work through the rules and to figure out like what's good and what's not good, and how to work with your team or your partner or your crew or whatever you're running, and really just sort of live that way. And I mean, I'm sure it's exciting. For me, it would be terrifying because I've got that kind of a personality where all those things make me nervous, and I wouldn't, on either side of it, I would be like, this is not for me. I mean, I'm glad that there are people out there. Well, I'm not glad for the drug dealer side of things, but they're out there. And then, I'm glad that police officers are out there and there are people like that doing what they do. And so I just sort of acknowledge, I'm like, it can't be for me. Like, I would just be a wreck because I would sit in the car just being anxious 100% of the time, like what's going to be the next call, and, am I going to be able to deal with it? And I get that, like, training and all that, that's what it's for. But you still have to have a certain kind of personality to be able to do that, right?
You do, and don't think that, because people used to always ask me, were you ever afraid when you did this? And I used to always tell them, it's like, any police officer that tells you they're not scared from time to time is either lying to you or they're stupid, because fear is a tremendous, it's been given to us for a reason. There's a man by the name of, Gavin DeBecker, who wrote a great book called The Gift of Fear. Mm-hmm. And and I'll be honest with you, there were nights where we didn't usually get these, like a noise run or something like that, because we were kind of saved for the gun run, the dope run, And so, but there were nights where, we would be going to a loud stereo or something. Well, it shows you how old I am. Nobody has a stereo anymore. But, we would have a noise run. And those were, hey, turn your TV down or turn your music down or whatever, and you're gone. And there would be times where my partner and I, or one of us would be like, I got a bad feeling about this run.
Yeah.
And that's, we were always like, oh, no, it's a noise run, no big deal. Whenever one of us had that feeling, we would acknowledge it and tell the other person, and we would be extra careful, even if it was some ridiculous, mundane, handled these a million times kind of runs. Because, when that hair on the back of your neck goes up,
it means
there's
something.
A reason for that. And and you need to pay attention to that, and you need to be very careful about how you approach that run. I don't care how minuscule it is. We always used to say there were, and I'll probably mess this up, there was unknown and high risk, and that was it. And high risk, you knew there was a gun, you knew shots had been fired or something. Unknown is you had no idea what you were walking into.
Yeah.
And when I worked in the drug unit, we had a guy years later who arrested a drug dealer, and the guy told him, he's like, you don't remember this, but 3 years ago, you came to the apartment where I was, you knocked on the door and told us to turn the stereo down. You didn't know this, but if you would have walked into the apartment, there was a guy behind the door with an AK-47 that would have killed you. And
that's serious.
Thank God it was just turn the stereo down, bye.
Yeah.
And that never had to be addressed. So, yeah, it's very dangerous. A lot of guns.
Yeah.
Everybody has guns these days, especially in America.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty crazy. So I live in Canada, so we don't have the sort of same gun, or even close to the same gun laws as some places in the US. I mean, I think people have hunting rifles and things like that, but there's like heavy restrictions on it. And I think to get a handgun would be, to get it legally at least, would be a real difficult task if you're not in some sort of, law enforcement agency or something like that, or an ex-military. I think maybe they're allowed to as well. But anyway, yeah, because I mean, you just don't you don't know what you're getting into, and that's that intuitive sense of like something feels bad. Like many people have dismissed that as I don't know, just one of those things, but it is super important because it gives you that extra level of alertness where you're then just, I mean, things might not happen. Like in that case, it's like, yeah, the guy was behind the door with his AK, but it didn't proceed further. But like, something there was like, felt bad. And it, luckily in that instance, it didn't go down, but it could have, right? And so when you spent your time in the drug unit, you did some undercover work. Is that correct? Now,
I did. I didn't do a ton of it
right.
because you can't tell this from looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall, so
okay.
I'm not a small person. But people used to kind of joke with me about that. It's like how, and I never changed my appearance. I never grew my hair long. I never grew a beard. I never changed my appearance. And people were like, "Well, how were you able to be successful in that?" And what I used to always tell them is, in that industry, and I hate to say this, it's an industry. The drug trade is an industry.
For sure.
The thing that motivates that industry is greed. And if you have money, you find somebody to sell you drugs. And I used to do some acting, so to speak. I mean, I remember one time I posed one of the day shift people when I was in the drug unit, and I worked nights too. One of the day shift people called me and said, "Hey, there are these kids coming down from Dayton, Ohio, that want to sell mushrooms, psychedelics, and get money to go party in Cincinnati. Will you buy from them?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So we came up with this. I posed as a professor of metallurgy from the University of Cincinnati. I didn't know anything about metal. I mean, you put metal out in the rain, it'll rust. Yeah. That's about as far as I knew. But I posed as a professor, met these kids in the park, gave them the $200. They gave me the mushrooms, and then instead of partying in Cincinnati, they partied in the Hamilton County Justice Center for the evening. But, you kind of have to act. You kind of have
absolutely.
to do that. And then the other thing we did was buy bus, where we would have an informant who we would wire up, give them the money. They would go out and get the drugs. Here's what the guy looks like. Here's where he is. And then we'd all kind of converge on him. And, a lot of times we had to chase people and stuff like that, that's never, people get hurt when you start chasing them and stuff. So, but that was kind of a fun thing to do, with your gang. Here we go. We're going to go chase this guy and get him. And
huge.
At 37, I was in my 40s at that time. I wasn't very fast. So it was like, I'm not going to, my best bet is just kind of sneak up on you. So.
Yeah. Sneak up 6'8",
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Just casual. But yeah, Jesus, man. I mean, 6'8", like, you must have been seriously intimidating to people, which is good, I guess, in those capacities. Like, I mean, I don't know if you like that fact about yourself, but whether you're that tall or if you're somewhat like a football player who's just jacked, like, there's just a different energy in the room where people are like, "Oh shit, he can squash me between his fingers." Which may or may not be true, but you at least are worried about it,
Exactly. And that was, I used to, my partner was a female and was not very big. She was in great shape. She was a black belt in karate, but her dad used to always joke, it's like, when the shooting starts, hide behind Terry, and that, cause I was 6'8", I was 240 pounds. And then you put a hat on me. So, I'm probably pushing 6'10", 6'11", and all the equipment and the vest and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I got in very few fights because people would just look at me like, "Yeah, I'm not going to win that."
Yeah.
And
what a great position to be in for you.
Yeah.
I mean, you seriously, like, anyone who picks a fight with you, they either know what they're doing or they're just like crazy to some degree,
Well, but that's the thing, and a lot of it was crazy. When you're drunk or you're high, the things that we learned in the academy about pain compliance to get people to do what we want to do, it didn't work. I mean, when you're drunk and you're high, you don't feel pain. So I remember one night it was 20 below zero. There was nothing going on. and we ended up stopping this car, and the guy jumped out immediately. And when people do that, you're like, and I looked at him like, don't run.
Yeah.
Of course, I put that right in his head. He took off running, and we chased him. And he ended up going up through a construction site up onto a very high chain link fence. And I grabbed him. And just as I grabbed him, it was in the winter, it was snowy. And I pulled him right down on top of me. And he was wailing, and he was punching me, hit me in the mouth. My partner jumps on him and literally elbows him right in the back of the neck. And he just throws her off like a rag doll.
Yeah.
And finally, I was able to get up. I grabbed him by the lapels, and he grabbed me by the lapels. And I was kneeing him in his private parts. I was kneeing the heck out of him.
Yeah.
And nothing was working. And we were like, we're going to have to shoot this guy. Because, finally, I managed to balance displace him. And then I just laid on top of him until the troops came. But, 240, probably, 260 pounds with all my equipment. He wasn't getting up. Yeah. So we just waited till the troops came. But that's the kind of, I'm like, if I was kneeing you in the groin over and over and over again, eventually you would succumb. This guy, he was so high, he didn't feel anything.
Listen, there's no eventually. Once I'd be like, all right, you win. Like, I'm done. Like, I'm going to throw up, and that'll be the end of my night. Like, but drugs do, I think especially drugs, like alcohol is one thing, but, when you deal with like meth and crack and things like that, it's like, you're just in the people, they get into a different state of consciousness, and it's like, I don't even know how to deal with it at that level. Like it's pretty intense. And so are a lot of the cases, just a side question, like are a lot of the how much of the violence that you encountered as an officer was drug or alcohol related, at least so that they were high or drunk? Not that it involved drugs, just like, was there a lot of that? Like, was that a huge part of the problem?
I always said if it wasn't for drugs, alcohol, and mental illness, you would not need nearly as many cops as you have. Because almost everything was, like I said, you go out to the bar, you get drunk, you go home, now you start smacking your wife around or your kids around or something like that. So, now it's a domestic violence run. You're drunk. And everything, DUIs, crashes, people who are addicted to drugs. How do I pay for the next drug? Well, I've got to break into somebody's house or their business and steal. And it's all interrelated. If you could get rid of drugs and alcohol and mental illness, and you're not going to, you wouldn't need nearly as many policemen.
Right. Yeah. It wouldn't completely alleviate everything. You'll still have gangs and mafias and things, people trying to do all that kind of shit. But it certainly is a big problem. And from my side, I'm like, I feel compassion for like drug addicts and things like that. I'm like, it sucks. They don't really want to be doing this, but they don't have another choice at this point. Their illness is just overriding all of their systems in their brain. Not that that's an excuse, that's just how it is, right? But you land up in all sorts of trouble.
You do.
Yeah,
you do. And that's, a lot of what we went after in the drug unit were the dealers. We were going after, I remember my very first search warrant where I had the SWAT team kick in the door after we'd made a buy. I got 127 grams of crack, which is a lot of crack, 5 guns, and $25,000 in cash.
Wow. That's a serious score.
I've stopped people who had $80,000 in cash on them, had dope on them. And it's like, why are you carrying all this money around? And you know what the guy told me? He said, well, everybody knows I'm a drug dealer. If I leave the money in my house, when I leave, people are going to break in and steal it. Yeah. So I'm going to carry my $80,000 in cash around with me.
Yeah. Listen, it's a different world, right? And it's like, no, you don't have any friends really in that sense, because everyone's just driven by how they can get cash for their next score. And if they got to rob you as the dealer, someone's going to do it, and it's not going to be fun for you, and you might not make it out alive. And it's a sad story, but that's kind of just what's out there, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you're right. Think about, you mentioned it earlier, these are not stupid people that are doing, in the drug trade. And if they would take that knowledge, that brain power, and put it into something productive, it's a, you know, I'm sure they'd be amazed at what they could get done. But imagine living your entire life looking over your shoulder, wondering if A, the police were coming for you, or B, the rival down the street was coming for you.
Yeah.
You know, and when I would arrest these kids, and most of them were minority young men, I would always ask them, you know, what are your goals? What are your dreams? What are your aspirations? And almost to a person, they didn't have any. You know, they figured, I got to live fast now because I know that, you know, in a month or a year, the guy down the street's going to kill me and take over my. I mean, what a horrible way to have to live your life.
Yeah.
I mean, never knowing whether today's going to be the last day. Literally, I mean, somebody's going to just pull up on the corner and shoot you.
Yeah.
You know,
and it could even be someone on your crew, right? Like, I mean,
yeah.
That's how crazy it is. Like, it's such a crazy world, and it's everywhere in the world. I mean, it's not unique to any particular place, right? And so, yeah, I mean, it is. And yeah, the people who are like, particularly who are the heads of these massive like drug or crime organizations, like they're very, very intelligent people. I mean, they're using their smarts for not so cool things, to say the least. But I mean, yeah. And, you know, when you look at it, I mean, especially now with like all these documentaries and shit like that, that's on Netflix and all that kind of stuff, like, you really get to see how brilliant all of this stuff is. And it's just a different business world, right? And they're business people, and it's all about networking and who you know and what deals and, you know, protections. And I mean, sometimes it's more on the evil side of things where you're doing like protection rackets and loan sharking and all that kind of stuff. But if you take your moral compass out of it, it's like, well, they're just doing business the way they think business should be done, right?
You're absolutely right.
And some are more successful than others, and often those who are much more ruthless in that world are more successful. But, you know, in our sort of normal business, the more ruthless you are, the more successful you'll be as well. It doesn't end up being killing people. It's just more like, it's just more money related. But I mean, people die. Like, that's not off the cards these days, I guess. And politics is roughly the same. And humans are very strange creatures. We do very peculiar and terrible things to each other for very strange reasons, which is, I don't know, a sad story of the human condition, I suppose. But anyway, so when you worked as a SWAT negotiator, right? So was that like your next step up? Did you join the SWAT team as that, or were you first part of I mean, how did that go?
So SWAT in Cincinnati, we were not a full-time SWAT team. So I started on the SWAT team when I was in the drug unit. And again, I'm going to date myself, we carried pagers. And when the pager went off, it's time to go and do your business. And SWAT was divided up into two groups: the tactical side, which were the men and women with the guns and all the cute little toys, and then the negotiators. And we were the people who would get on the phone with somebody or talk to somebody through a door or whatever, and things like that. So that was the two groups. I applied to be a negotiator. I wasn't stupid. The negotiators, you know, we kind of had a big mobile home that was heated and air conditioned and had a bathroom, and there was food and water and things like that. And so when you negotiate, you can do that. And the tactical guys, a lot of times, are just laying in the snow, you know, for hours, surrounding a house and stuff like that. So I wanted to be part of the best, and SWAT was really the best. They got the best training, the best equipment. But I was also realistic enough to know that at my age, probably laying around in the snow and things like that, probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
So I joined the negotiators and absolutely loved it.
Yeah. And so was there a lot of training, hopefully, for that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we had very intense training at the beginning. And again, I didn't know what I remember the very first time I ever did a scenario training. There was a hostage behind a door with a bad guy, and the hostage is screaming the whole time. And I spent most of the time talking to the hostage,
right?
You know, and then afterwards they're like, "Okay,
you're talking to the wrong person."
Yeah, basically, you know, ignore the hostage, talk to the bad guy. That's the person you need to talk to. That's the person you need to convince to come out and let the hostage out and stuff like that. I had no idea.
Yeah, well,
in that. So
how are you supposed to know, right?
Exactly. That's how you train. And then every month, once we got our initial training, every month we would train more, go through different scenarios. Every time we had a call up, there was a debrief. What went right, what went wrong, what could we do better? And we were always massaging, always trying to get better. We worked with a psychologist, so we do a scenario and he'd be like, well, did you think about this? Or maybe this person's schizophrenic, maybe they're off their medicine. Maybe, so just the more experience you got, the better you were at doing it. And, but like I said, it was a lot of fun, but there was a movie that came out years ago called The Negotiator. Samuel L. Jackson was and it was like, he did everything.
Right.
It's like,
it's a whole team.
That's not yes, there's one person negotiating, but then there's a person sitting right next to him, listening to everything that's going on. And then there are 3 or 4 more people out there kind of working the crowd, talking to the person's mother or their wife or their girlfriend or whoever, getting information. And then they're passing notes. So if you're negotiating with somebody, you might get a note that be like, don't ask him about his mother because this is why we're here. He's mad at his mother. So don't talk about his mother. Oh, okay, good. That's good information to know.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a team effort.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess for the movies, they kind of need to have like a point hero and, a team makes it more complicated, but absolutely. It's a team effort and it makes sense to me, right? How there's so much that goes into it that you couldn't possibly do it all by yourself anyway. I mean, I suppose if you had to, you could pull something together, but it wouldn't be at the same level or with the same, spread of resources of resource available to you, right? So do you have any particularly like memorable incidences or stories that kind of, not necessarily bad, or they could be great ones, like your favorite time? I'd love to hear some.
Yeah, I'll give you 2 stories. One's kind of funny. The other one's funny, but more in a tragic way.
Sure.
So
that's my favorite.
I get a call.
Yeah.
Yeah. The pager goes off, and I happened to be working that night. I'd been promoted. I was a sergeant, and so I was in a uniform in a marked car, and so I was able to get to the scene pretty quickly. And I was the first negotiator there, and I was talking to the beat guys, the district guys. I'm like, what's the deal? It's like, he's drunk. He's barricaded himself in the house with his wife, and he's got a gun. Like, okay, you have him on the phone? Yeah, we do. So I get the phone, and sometimes it takes a long time to develop rapport with somebody. It did not take a long time to develop rapport with this guy. After about 10 minutes, I said to him, what would it take for you to come out? He said, give me a beer. I said, if I got you a beer, I have your word that you would come out. He said, do I have your word that I can drink it? I said, absolutely. If I get you a beer, you can drink it, but you've got to let your wife come out, put the gun down and come out. Yeah, you have my word. So I give $5 to one of the beat guys. I said, go down to the store, buy a beer. Comes back, tactical guys put it on the front porch. I said, your beer's on the front porch, but you don't get it until your wife comes out, you put the gun down and you come out. And he's again, you promised me that I can drink the beer. I promise you can drink the beer. And here comes the wife. Here he comes, no gun. He gets handcuffed. We let him drink the beer, and off to jail he goes. So it was just that easy.
Right.
99.9% of them aren't that easy. And the thing I learned as a negotiator is that as a policeman, almost everything I did was face to face with another person. If I got called on a run or I'm doing a traffic stop, you're there, I'm there. It's face to face. As a negotiator, let me back up. And that face-to-face allows me to see things. So, if you're sitting there and you're balling up your fists, it's like, well, maybe you want to fight me. Not a good idea, but maybe you do. Yeah. Or, you're kind of looking around. Maybe you're looking for a place to run.
Yeah.
Well, I can see that and I can mitigate that. I can set you down. I can handcuff you. I can put you in the back of the car, whatever's appropriate. But as negotiators, we didn't have that luxury. So we had to figure out what was going on based on what people were saying, what they weren't saying, and how they were saying it. And that was really an art. And, a lot of times you'd spend 2 hours talking to somebody, kind of over here, when the problem was over here. And that person hadn't even gotten to the real reason we were here. They just want to talk about this for 2 hours.
Right.
And the way I described it is, we've all probably been to the park and played on the teeter-totter or the seesaw, whatever you want to call it. So when we start negotiating with the person, they're emotional side is way up in the air and their rational side is kind of down on the ground. So we spend sometimes hours asking open-ended questions. Well, tell me about X, and get them to talk. Because all we're trying to do is burn off that emotional energy to where we can hopefully get the teeter-totter to equilibrium, and then eventually get it so where their rational side is up in the air and their emotional side is down on the ground. Because you're going to make better decisions when you're thinking rationally. Right. So keeping that in mind. And the other issue about what we did was trust. We never lied to people. People would always say, well, I'll come out, but you got to promise me I'm not going to go to jail. Like, well, when you come out, you are going to go to jail, and then we deflect and try to talk about something else, because it was very plausible that a year from now or 2 years from now or 3 years from now, we would be back negotiating with that same person again. And we never wanted them to be able to say, you lied to me. Yeah. Because as soon as that happens, your credibility is done. You can't negotiate with that person because they're not going to have anything to do with you whatsoever. So having all that in mind, the next story is a little more tragic, but it kind of has a funny ending. This man wanted to kill himself, and he slit his wrist initially, and that didn't work. And then he turned the gas on in his stove and stuck his head in the oven. That didn't work. And then he called, I don't remember if it was a family member or a friend. And they ended up calling the police, and we get there, and I'm talking to him. Now he's got a gun. He's going to shoot himself. Probably took me 2 hours. And in all honesty, I think I just warmed down. I think he was exhausted. And he's like, I want to come out. I said, okay, good. That would be great. I said, just put the gun down. When you come out, I'll come down to the scene and we'll talk face to face. He's like, I'd really like that. I really want to talk to you. I'm like, okay, great. I'd like to do that. I said, but don't hang up the phone. Just bring the phone with you. And when you get outside, do what the tactical officers outside tell you to do. I said, they're going to handcuff you. They may even put you down on the ground. Don't freak out. That's just what's going to happen. And then I'll come and talk to you. Okay. He hangs up the phone, which is normal because at the end of a conversation, we're programmed kind of to do that. About 20 seconds later, one of the tactical guys comes on the radio and is like, we heard a shot. And I thought, you got to be kidding me. You shot yourself after all this. He did. Shot himself in the head. But he shot himself at an angle where the bullet went into his temple, underneath his skin, all the way around his head and out the other side. Never penetrated his skull, never got to his brain. Yeah, exactly.
I didn't even know that
you've tried 3 times to kill yourself that night. Yeah. Tell me that isn't God saying, hey, buddy, I don't want you up here yet. You got more to do.
Yeah.
And so I mean, we literally, called the ambulance in, got him all bandaged up. He went off to the hospital, and then he went off for a psych evaluation after that. So, I mean, it was sort of comical, but
tragically
thank God he didn't
comical.
kill himself.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's insane. You tried 3 times. Well, listen, I don't know if the first attempt to me sounds legit, like people do die slitting their wrists. I've never heard of this sticking your head in an oven business before. Maybe if you turn the gas on and you ignite it, okay, now we're in business, I suppose. Or if you're doing it in the garage with the car exhaust or whatever. But, I mean, and then he's like, oh, yeah, I have a gun. He's like, I could do that too. And then he's like, oh, and now I'm in a strange position. No, listen, I don't want, I mean, joking about suicide is, it's all in good heart. I mean, I feel for those people who suffer, and, my parents are both psychologists. And so, I've sort of been around it for a long time. And so, it's tragic, but, I always like to see the light side of things anyway. Not to dismiss the bad stuff, but it is. But I mean, just to go back to the negotiating part of things, it's like, I mean, it's such a crazy profession to have, right? Because, I mean, I sort of see it like you're talking, you meet and talk to people on a regular basis on arguably the worst day of their life, right? Even if they didn't mean for it to be. They, as you say, emotions run high and they take over, and you end up doing things that you shouldn't have done or that you wouldn't normally have do. And your job is to basically get them to realize, well, their best option right now, given the shit show that they're in, is to just turn themselves in, or to just walk out, I guess is the expression you used. And so I mean, it must be a hell of a thing to, deal with people at that level all the time. Like, did you find it particularly like difficult to deal with people like that?
I mean, as a policeman, you could probably say the same thing in general.
Right.
It's never good when the police show up, whether we're stopping you to give you a ticket because you were speeding, or we're knocking on your door to tell you to call the hospital because your grandmother's passed away, or, we're there to arrest your husband who's the primary breadwinner because he's knocking you around, whatever it is. You're usually meeting people on a bad day, and they're having a bad day. And the thing you've got to remember, and I always remember this, especially when traffic stops. If I stopped you and, the red lights and the sirens and all that, and for you, that may be the most traumatic thing that happens to you all year. For me, it's the third traffic stop of the night. And that's something I was always cognizant of. And even when I was in the drug unit and we were dealing with people, it was like, there's somebody somewhere that loves this person, whether it's a mother or a father or a girlfriend or boyfriend. There's somebody, and they are, as you said, a person. Yeah. It's not and that's the thing, especially in law enforcement, you've got to be real careful of. When you deal with, the dregs of society, the low of the low, every night you start to think that everybody's like this.
Right.
Everybody's a criminal, everybody's a crackhead, and they're not. 99% of the people are good, decent, honest people who just want the best for their family, their community, and their country. Yeah. That's what they want. But you're dealing with that very small group night after night after night after night. So as a negotiator, it was kind of just a much greater extension of being a policeman. And 90% of the time, we got the person out safely. Yeah. Whether they were just barricaded by themselves or whether there was a hostage. I never lost a hostage. I did lose some people that were barricaded. But to your point, if you think about it, I'm dealing with this person on the worst day of their life. But the problem that's underlying this worst day of their life very well may have been 10, 20, 30, 40 years in the making.
Right.
And for me to show up and say, okay, in 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, you're going to fix this, is not terribly realistic. And again, I did the best I could with the best training and the best people. Whether you took your life was your decision.
Yeah.
I did everything I could to make sure you didn't do that you came out and that you lived another day, and whoever loved you got to see you again. But the decision to do that was up to you.
Yeah.
And I don't mean this to sound callous. I never lost any sleep over the people that killed themselves, because I knew I did the very best that I could, and it wasn't my decision. I didn't dispatch them. They did it themselves.
Oh no, I completely agree. And you can only control yourself, right? And especially for someone like you in that position where it's like you're going to go in, you're going to do whatever you can to help, right? Or to change the situation, or to navigate it, or to do whatever you need to do. But at the end of the day, people are going to make decisions like that, and it's sad and it's tragic, but it's no one other than their own fault, if you even want to say it as a fault, a blame sort of thing. And I mean, I assume it's like that in many professions, right? It's like whether you're a police officer, or you're an ambulance driver, or you're a doctor, or you're a psychologist, or whatever it is, where you're trying to help people and they just can't, they refuse it in some sense, or maybe they're too far gone in some direction, or I don't know. There's lots of ways I suppose you could think about it, but yeah, like what can you do, right? You can just do what you can, and then that you just got to live with the consequences. And so that makes sense to me that that's sort of how it panned out for you, right? And I think it's also a healthy approach to it as well, where you're not so involved in it personally that every time it goes not how you would want it to go, that you take it like a personal failure, which I suppose some people do, and maybe you learn to work through that. And it's not that it's terrible if that is how it is for you, but if that's your profession, right, then you got to learn how to deal with that, because it's not going to be the last time it's going to happen. And so, yeah, but I mean, so through all of that, like, I mean, we've been discussing this stuff for a long time, and I've loved it. But so just sort of towards the end of this episode, like, what made you transition into a place where you decided that you wanted to inspire people and, create this or write this book that you've done, and, working with your own pain and suffering that you went through with your cancer treatments, which I know were tremendously difficult and painful and traumatic probably, and all of that stuff, and still being in it to a large degree. Like, what made you use that to be like, this is the tool for me to inspire others, which I completely agree, and I'm grateful that you've done. I'm not questioning your decision. I'm just interested, like, how did you get there?
Yeah, I sometimes wonder that question myself.
Yeah.
I mean, I really, if you look back when this started in 2012, and I have this rare form of melanoma that appears on my foot, and I go through multiple surgeries, I'm on a drug that gives me flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week, and I take that drug for almost 5 years. I mean, you imagine having
So
the
crazy.
flu every week for 5 years. It's when I was first suggested, I was just incomprehensible. I'm like, that's stupid. I mean, what idiot would do that?
Yeah.
This idiot, and the doctor was, do the best you can. And then, when that stopped and the disease came back in 2017, I had my left foot amputated. 2018, came back in 2019, 2 more surgeries. And then last year, this undiagnosed tumor in my ankle grew large enough that it broke my tibia, my shin bone. And right in the middle of the pandemic, I had my left leg amputated. Only surgery of the day. Wife drops me off at the hospital, can't be with me. Just a horrible situation. And I also found out I had tumors in my lungs. And a couple months ago, my oncologist actually showed me the CAT scan of my lungs. And I have no medical background, but I've been doing this long enough that I can kind of, like, that doesn't look right, or, So I looked at the CAT scan, and I looked at my oncologist, and I'm like, how was I alive? He's like, I have no idea. I mean, your entire lungs look like they're totally filled with tumor, and you've got fluid around the pleural spaces in your lung. He's like, I don't know. And it's kind of, I kind of look at it like, it's sort of like the guy who tried to kill himself 3 times. God's not done with me.
Yeah.
I mean, should I be dead? Absolutely. There's several stories I left out along the cancer journey that I probably should have been dead during those, but he's not done with me yet. And whereas I felt my passion and my purpose was law enforcement at one time, now with whatever time I have left, and I'm certainly on the downside of it. I mean, the tumors in my lungs are being somewhat controlled by this drug, but they're still there. They're not going away and things like that. But it's to put as much goodness, as much positivity, as much love, as much peace back into the world as I can. And that's kind of, people are like, well, do you think about dying? Yeah, I think about it. It doesn't scare me because I found my purpose in life and I lived it. And, I when I found out I was going to have my leg amputated and that, I went to the church, I went to the mortuary, I went to the cemetery, I planned my own funeral, and people were like, that's kind of defeatist, isn't it? And I'm like, well, last time I checked, we're all going to die.
Yeah.
Nobody's working on a cure for life as far as I know.
Yeah.
So I said, everybody dies, but not everybody really lives. And I feel I've really lived. So death doesn't frighten me the way it does for a lot of people. And I remember there's an old Native American Blackfoot proverb that I heard years ago that I love. And it goes like this. It says, when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. That's what I want. I want to live my life the very best I can, do as much good as I can with whatever time I have left. And then when it's time to go with a smile and say, you know what? What's on the other side of this life? Let's find out.
Yeah. Welcome as death dances to your door. That's amazing. And it's not the position that most people have, unfortunately, because I think that if they did, then people would be living very different lives, right? You come face to face with death, whether it's from this or that. It's like you're forced to really take it in and be like, well, what am I going to do with what time I have left, right? And I've been fortunate enough to speak to a couple of people like on the show and just in life in general that are sort of at this point or have gotten to that point and come out of it. And it's an amazing transformation to see where, people will go like, and I've started to embrace it as well, even though I'm not facing death, where I'm like, I mean, yeah, like we all die. Like if I die in next year or something, I mean, for me, it's fine. Other people will be sad or whatever. And that's, the way that death works. They say pity the living, not the dead. And I think it's true. And that the fear of death stops us from doing so much, right? Because we're afraid of like all sorts of things. Never mind dying itself, but just the consequences of it, right? And it's like, yeah, but this is all stuff that is so out of our control that we're trying to control that we can't. And, the mind has a very peculiar way of dealing with these things, and it's not the best, but we're evolving and we're getting there. And I think more people are starting to appreciate life. And I think COVID actually did a real good number on a lot of people in the sense of like, it really forced people to be like, what do you want to do with your life? Like you might not make it to next year because especially at the beginning of COVID where we didn't know what it was. The professionals and experts didn't know what it was, which therefore meant no one knew what it was. And there was certainly this element or this air of like, it could get and kill any of us. No one is safe. And it turned out to, I guess, thankfully, that wasn't so much the case. And, there's been a fortune of death, and that's terribly sad. And, no disrespect for that. But before it was known what it was and all that, like that first few weeks, maybe it might have been, everyone had to be like, I might die soon, right? Young people, old people, healthy, sick, rich, poor, it doesn't matter. No one was safe, right? And that was really, listen, it's not a fun thing to go through, but if you go through it and you come out on the other side knowing that that was a really like could be a spiritual moment for you or for me or whatever, to be like, okay, well, life's never guaranteed. I might die in a car accident tomorrow anyway, or I might get cancer, or I might this or that, or who knows, right? And really, it's an opportunity now to take the time to be like, well, what do I want with life? And how can I have positive impact on people and enjoy things and live a life of hope and fulfillment and love and, all these things that you speak about and that you're professing now, which is unbelievable. And I think that that's something good that's come from all of this for some people. Not everyone, obviously, but, one step at a time. And so... but you were like really on, or you are at that point, right? You're not like maybe, you're like, well, this is real now. Like, I don't know how long I got left, but it's not as long as my wife or whatever it is probably. And then it's, how do I now deal with that? And so it's amazing that you've managed to, be where you are, even if it wasn't necessarily conscious, like, it doesn't matter, right? Like this, it's just the blessing that has come from it. So kudos to you for that. And your message of inspiration of like being able to deal with pain and with life's woes and all the shit that happens, it's so important, right? Just to give people that idea of like, there's so much more that is out there if you're willing to go for it, right? And it's not about achievement necessarily or like financial success or whatever. I mean, those things are good, or and they're nice, but it's really at a deeper level. At least that's how I see it, where it's like, are you going to feel fulfilled in your life with what you're doing, right? And that's a message that I certainly stand with. And so, yeah, man, thank you. In terms of like, if people want to buy your book, or your website? Like, do you want to just plug those quick, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So my website is called Motivational Check, and you can get access to the book. You can get access to my social media accounts. You can leave me a message. So motivationalcheck.com will get you to me that way. Sustainable Excellence is pretty much available wherever you can get a book online. You can get it through Amazon. You can get it through Barnes & Noble. You can get it through Apple iBooks. So anywhere there you can get it. But as I said, you can also go onto my website and get the link to Amazon, and pretty much that's how you get a hold of it.
Yeah, awesome. And I would definitely recommend to everyone listening that you go check it out. It's something special. And thank you very much for coming on today. I really have appreciated it.
Thank you, Shane. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it was a really fun and interesting conversation. So thanks, and hopefully we'll get to speak again soon.
I'd like that.
Until next time, take care.